They call this the most advanced era in human history. Apparently, there are medical breakthroughs everywhere. Americans more healthy and overweight than they've ever been. According to U.S. board-certified physician and expert nutritionist Dr. Amy Lee, one of the main reasons is 3 harmful foods that are being passed off as health foods all over the country. And wait till you hear this, because these foods can cause weight gain, clog your digestive tract, deplete your energy, and wreck your skin. They're banned in other countries. Yet shockingly, they're still legal in the US. The great news is Dr. Lee will explain how to stop and reverse this damage by simply learning which foods to avoid and how to spot them. And by doing so, you can experience easier weight loss, smooth digestion, and vibrant energy. To find out these 3 fake health foods, go to 3harmfulfoods.com/inspired. That's the number 3, 3harmfulfoods.com/inspired, or click on a link in the description down below. Hey, Inspire Tribe, my fellow freedom lovers. Jean Nolan here. Thank you so much for tuning in. I don't know if we've had some audio issues there or not, but we're excited that you're here. We're going to make this intro very short. This is a highly important subject. So we've had him on before. We welcome him back today. James Roguski, who's a researcher, author, natural health proponent, and an activist. And he's been blowing the whistle on the WHO on the amendments to the international health regulations and the new pandemic treaty, what that really means, and how this has just absolutely, been spun in a very wrong way to the public. So he's untangling this web and has been doing it for over 2 years almost, and reaching millions of people. Now we have a deadline. He says it's January 27th. So welcome with me, James Roguski. Thank you so much for joining us again today, sir.
Oh, thank you very much for having me. I'm going to dive right in. And so January 27th is actually a deadline, not for us, but for the WHO. There's a rule in regards to the amendments to the international health regulations that they know very well, because on October 2nd, they had their lawyer explain it to them in public. And I've published this many times. And that rule says that any nation can submit amendments to these international health regulations, but they have to do so 4 months before the assembly in May. Well, the assembly in May starts on May 27th, so 4 months in advance of that is January 27th. It isn't that we have to do something. It isn't that we have to stop them from doing something. They have to produce the goods. They're obligated to stop the secrecy, maybe use that hashtag stop the secrecy, and say, here is what we have crafted. This is the working group, and you get 4 months to review it before the assembly begins. Now, several years ago, Nancy Pelosi very famously said, I believe it was about the Obamacare legislation, oh, here's a 1,000-page bill. You get to vote on it tomorrow. Don't bother reading it, just sign it. You could read it later. Well, they get away with that in Congress because they don't have an Article 55 type rule that very clearly says any nation can propose amendments, but they have to do so 4 months in advance. Now, when I got started in this, almost 2 years ago now, I learned a couple of months after the fact that on January 18th, 2022, the Biden administration properly, I'll give them credit, they followed the rules. They submitted a package of 13 amendments, or amendments to 13 articles, on January 18th, 2022, 4 months in advance of the May meeting. Well, what happened basically was the nations got a chance to look at it. And the week before the meeting, it became very clear that they weren't having any of it. And it never even got discussed. And so you have to realize that there are dozens, if not hundreds, of documents that go flying through, during this assembly. And so you can't just drop that at the last minute like they're probably going to attempt to do. The delegates are supposed to be given a 4-month period to consider all of these many different issues that they're going to vote upon. because the World Health Assembly is supposed to be the governing body of the WHO. Well, if they can slip something through the assembly, they get what they want without proper oversight. Now, they did submit all of these amendments back on September 30th, 2022, meaning all of the nations submitted what they wanted. They kept it secret until December of 2022. I've been reporting on it, ad infinitum. And in January, a year ago, I published stopthewho.com. And I actually made an hour-and-a-half movie. You can watch it and you can read the article. It's been translated into, I think, like 18 different languages. And all of the information that anybody might ever want is on stopthewho.com, except the information that we really want, which is, well, hey, wait a minute. For this entire year, they've been negotiating in secret, and they have never published a revised version, a second draft, a working, nothing. Okay. Now, we know that they have interim documents because in their meetings, few people let it slip out. And they said, oh, are we going to submit, the version that we got during the summer? And I'm like, version that you got during the summer? I didn't see anybody publish that. Okay. And so the issue is in October, their co-chairperson said very clearly, we're trying to get 196 nations together on these 300 amendments. We're not going to meet our deadline. And that should have been like worldwide news. Hey, not going to happen this year. But then they went and talked for about an hour, and I published this back in October, plotting, conspiring. I did use that word. They were conspiring. It's not a theory. I published the evidence of how they're going to just ignore the rules. And so one last sentence. Many things, well, actually maybe a couple of more sentences. Many things can happen between now and January 27th. Maybe they pull a rabbit out of their hat and they, present what they're supposed to present, whatever the version is that they want to have considered in May. I really doubt it. Maybe an individual nation steps in and says, hey, everybody can't figure out what they want, but we know what we want. And so any individual nation could submit a package of amendments. A group of nations could do that. But what's likely to happen, because it's what they said they were going to do, is they're going to present a document. And I'll use the analogy. It's kind of like if you got your mom to write you a note that the dog ate your homework. Okay. Oh, sorry, we didn't make it. Never mind. Ignore the rules. Give us a break. No. The only thing that people need to do right now is spread this information, take this video and raise everyone's awareness. It's not a deadline for us. It's not a deadline where we have to try to stop something. They're having their own train wreck, and we just need to watch whether they're honorable people, because if they were honorable back in October, they would have said, or they would have put out a press release, had a press conference and said, sorry, we tried. We're just not going to meet the deadline. We'll give you a status update. We'll give you a progress report, but we're going to have to come back in 2025. That's what they coulda, shoulda, woulda done. But what they're likely to do, because this is what they said they were going to do, is pull a Nancy Pelosi kind of deal. They have a meeting scheduled for February, a meeting scheduled for April. They want to ignore the rule of that 4-month notice, keep negotiating right up to the last minute, and then drop a surprise bomb into the assembly and just go, oh, vote for it, and boom, done. And that is just absolutely not acceptable.
James, I disagree with you on one single point, that we don't have to do something. I believe actually we have to blow this up every day, like you say, share, but also calling phones.
I stand corrected.
Sending emails. We have to be as noisy about this as possible because one thing is to stop this from happening altogether, or at least, you know, soften the blow. And the other thing is to try to undo it once it's done, which is much, much harder. We know this. But basically, just in a nutshell, James has explained this millions of times. What we're talking about here is two things: amendments to the international health regulations. It sounds so boring that nobody thinks it could be threatening. And the new pandemic treaty, which catches way more attention, but it's actually less problematic than the international health regulations in some ways, because it goes through a different process, right, James? But the amendments to the international health regulations, and the main things they want to pass through is make it mandatory rather than voluntary to follow the guidelines by the WHO. And the other really problematic thing among many is that they want to remove all human rights restrictions. So basically take away your human dignity. And so when they pass rules and they say to the member nations, you got to do this, everybody has to follow that, no matter what that means. Taking vaccines that are probably untested or medicine that's untested, whatever they decide, they could dictate to the member nations. I know these amendments have kind of been non-negotiable until now. That's what they really want. Is that true? Or do you have a different perspective on it?
I'll just add to it. Okay. Because there's 300 amendments and we're not going to cover them all. So I'll touch on a couple of them. Something like this, which is an old school vaccine passport. Okay. There's a little form in here, you know, that people fill out when they're traveling. And that is found in Annex 6 of the International Health Regulations. Now, what they really want, and a lot of these amendments primarily came from the European Union, because the European Union had a vaccine passport like that. They handed over, the way I put it, the carcass, the dead carcass of that system, the software and all of the protocols and the applications and all that. They handed that over to the WHO last June when it died. The 2-year period that they were using that in Europe expired. And so they are busy building that system while they're pretending to negotiate whether or not to implement it. So when somebody's busy building something and negotiating it at the same time, you might ask yourself, where do you think those negotiations are headed? Well, I got a clue back in November of 2022 when the Indonesian health minister was speaking to the B20, and he said, what we need is a global digital health certification network. If you're properly jabbed and properly tested, then you can travel. I'm like, well, wait a minute. The jabs don't stop infection or transmission. So what does properly jabbed even mean? The tests are not tests. The PCR is a laboratory process. It's not a diagnostic test, as per Kerry Mullis, you know, said that very clearly. He's the inventor of it. You know, before he passed away, he made it very clear that that's not a diagnostic. They also want to have a prophylaxis certificate and a recovery certificate, a traveler locator form, and a passenger health declaration, and all kinds of other paperwork tied to a QR code. Now, wait a minute. What are those things? What do they certify? Well, they certify that you're compliant. And if you're compliant and you fit into the social, you know, rules, oh, well, then they'll give you back some of your rights that they took away by implementing such a thing. Well, that's something that I put together all that information on rejectdigitalenslavement.com. That's something that needs to be pushed back on, because what they are likely to do is implement that on a voluntary basis if they can't get it to be legally binding. And we have to push back on that regardless of whether, you know, regardless of what happens with these documents. Ultimately, what happens is on a local level, the same darn thing is still possible. Implementing these types of changes or amendments or a new document is just going to make it more confusing to people, because it's not going to take away your rights. Inalienable rights cannot be taken away. I'm going to say that again. That's the definition of the word unalienable. Your rights and freedoms are yours to defend. This is mostly going to amp up the power of the programming and the hypnosis and the propaganda. Oh, well, they passed the treaty. You got to do this. You got to. No, I don't. I have unalienable rights. I have freedoms. What these documents are primarily is a venture capital prospectus to take public money by the tens of billions of dollars and build out the pharmaceutical hospital emergency industrial complex, seeking out more pathogens to bring them into the laboratory. I don't know if you saw it. I didn't read the article, I must admit, but I saw a quick blurb from John Campbell. The recent innovation that they're working on is they found some kind of pangolin virus. They cooked up a stew in the lab and they gave it to humanized mice that have been given receptors that are found in humans, and they basically killed all the mice with this virus. That's the kind of work they're doing. Call it dual use gain of function research, or I'm sorry, dual use research of concern, or gain of function research. That's biological warfare. And, I don't mean to offend anyone, but I'm advocating for an 11th commandment. Okay. Thou shalt not alter God's work. Messing around with either the human or animal or plant genomes, if anything is a sin, it's men and women playing God, altering genetic material. I put together the People's Declaration.com, because what they're essentially doing is trying to fund the One Health approach to go to every bat cave, every chicken coop, every pigsty, every hospital, every sewage treatment plant, find new pathogens that they can mess with so that they can make more money by making more biological weapons to inject people with, and more money by scaring the daylights out of people with the pathogens that they're digging up and altering. That is not how you would stop the next pandemic. That's how you would keep that business model growing. It's all about pandemic profiteering. And what is going on, to shift gears just a little bit, because I mostly want to focus on the amendments. The
Yes.
problem with the other document, which has had many, many names, most people call it the treaty, but it's not really. It's a framework convention. They've been saying that from the beginning. They want a framework convention. Well, most people are not busy talking in coffee shops or, a restaurant or whatever, having a conversation about framework conventions. But you should, because all you got to do is look to 1992 and the Framework Convention for Climate Change. Hey, how's that working out? All of the rules with energy use and carbon constraints and all that. A framework convention, the agreement could be an empty piece of paper. It's chapter 3 in the latest version that you need to read and understand. They want to set up a whole new bureaucracy called the Conference of the Parties. They would send delegates on a yearly basis to make decisions that would impact your life, but you wouldn't have anything to say about it. Everybody who's watching, raise your hand. Did you have input at the 28th Conference of the Parties back in December for climate change? Did they ask you, what you thought should be done? And that is the danger, is getting lost in the details. The details matter, but the bigger picture of, wait just a minute, do you even know who your delegate is? They get to go and speak for the nation. They're appointed, they're unelected, they're unaccountable, they're largely unknown. They make a decision in regards to these amendments, and the Senate never gave their consent in 1969 for the original international health regulations. They never gave their consent in 2005. They didn't give their consent in 2022. What makes anybody think anybody's going to ask the Senate for their consent this time? The way it works is wrong, but the way they've been doing it is these unelected bureaucrats make a decision to change international law, and unless the head of state of your nation sends a letter to reject it to your nation. Period of time goes by. Sorry, your silence is consent. Now, I'm on a little bit of a rant, so let me go a little bit further. Last time in 2022 or in May of 2022, the WHO's World Health Assembly literally said that they voted to adopt a package of 5 amendments, but there's no record of them actually voting. And so on November 28th, we got a dozen members of the European Parliament to send a letter to the WHO Director General saying, we're looking over these amendments from 2022 and we don't see any vote that ever really properly happened. Could you send us evidence that you actually voted? There is no evidence that they voted. They just said that they adopted them. So these are the kind of people that we're dealing with. Well, over the course of the next 18 months, of all places, the Iranian delegation rejected them. And at the very last minute, I haven't been able to get my hands on the exact document, but on the New Zealand official webpage, they say that they did reject those amendments. Well, that's kind of a moot point because they never actually voted on them. And so, but that whole thing is just wrong, right? The idea that a bunch of unknown people can make a decision, and unless the head of state of your nation rejects them, it just goes through. They didn't ask the Senate about any of this, and that's just completely in violation. It's all null and void as far as I'm concerned.
It is, James, and I want to. That's the point I do want to emphasize. Like you said before, I do not consent, or for very important words. And there is the maxim of law is that if a rule, law, or regulation violates a constitutional right, then it is null and void. We know this in theory. And I totally agree with you on that. And basically, we've lived by that, especially since 2020. I do not consent. I don't care what you say. But here's the problem that I think a lot of people are not realizing is if and when this is passed, it means that 196 nations in their own way will begin codifying this into national regulations and laws. So now, because you have so many compliant governments and you have such a compliant structure, so now you're not saying, oh, I'm not going to go abroad, I'm not going to travel because I don't want to deal with this. You're going to have to deal with this in your own hospitals. You're going to have to deal with this in your own schools. You're going to have to deal with this at your workplace and everywhere you go because it's going to be codified. That's why I'm so vocal about being vocal and stopping this from happening altogether. Because the fight later is much harder than the fight now. That's the way I see it. So what can people do, James, right now, this very moment, to make their voices heard and actually have an impact?
There are many things, but I'll start with the easy one. Okay. Take this video and share it widely because step number 1 is awareness. Now I'm gonna take a little different tack than you might have expected. Okay. What I have been promoting that people should do is slow it down and don't be fearful, don't be afraid, don't be in a panic. Find a space in your heart to share some love with the people that you care about. Everyone probably has a phone with a bunch of phone numbers in it. And maybe you have a bunch of text messages that you've received or sent to people. You have a bunch of email addresses in your email account. You have social media contacts where you can direct message someone. Find a place in your heart, start at the top of the list or start in the middle or start at the bottom. A, B, C, D, E, F, G, Ann, Bob, Carol, Doug, Emily, so forth and so on. Think about someone that you care about. Literally, think about them. Send them an email and say, watch this video, pay attention, get informed, tell me what you think. Okay? Love you. Hope you're doing well. then send them a text message, then send them a direct message. Whatever contact information you have, find someone you love, put it in your heart to just raise their awareness, not try to scare them, not try to convince them of anything. Take a look at this inspired video. Tell me what you think. Okay. A, B, C, D, E, F, G, all the way down to Z. That'll take you until January 27th. Okay. After you have done your job with the ones you love to raise their awareness, go nag your politicians, go nag alternative media. Hey, how come Inspired's talking about this, but how come all these other things aren't? Same thing. They're a little harder to contact. Okay. But reach out to them. This is not coming from a place of fear. They're actually failing. Okay. Come from a place of heart-centered love. Be informed. Don't try to convince anybody that they got to be all afraid and the world's coming to an end or anything like that. Maybe we're in the end times, but some of us are supposed to make it through that, and I plan to be one of them. And so share this video with the people you love and ask them what they think, because what's going on is people aren't listening anymore. They're all hyper and crazy and whatever. So if you go from A to Z in your phone book, your text messages, your emails, your social media contacts, then you've done what you can do. And after you've done all that you can do, you can do more. You can go find, I did an article back in June about censorship, and I listed 630 some alternative media outlets. I'm half joking, but I'm totally serious. Give Tucker Carlson a call. Give Joe Rogan a call. Right? Give any place you go to get alternative media. Go, hey, how come you guys aren't talking about this? Right? All the way down. These people are very difficult to get a hold of. Right? If you have any questions, give me a phone call. 310-619-3055. 310-619-3055. All of the information is on jamesroguski.substack.com. This is not something to be panicked about or fearful about. They should be the ones in fear of us because we're on to them. They're failing. They have a deadline. They're going to probably miss that deadline, and then they're going to probably try to cheat. And we need as many eyeballs watching them to see. And if you want to put out any prayer into the universe, pray that they find inside themselves to do the honorable thing. The honorable thing would be for them to have a press release going, yeah, we just couldn't get it together in time. Sorry. We'll see you next year. I'll be right here waiting for them in 2025 if they come back and try it again. But what they should be doing is preparing a status report saying, kind of hard to get 196 nations to agree. We didn't quite make it. We'll see you next year. Now, then we can talk about the other agreement, because that is in just as much trouble. It's in a state of flux. The intergovernmental negotiating body that was tasked with organizing the negotiations for the framework convention has been told, hey, go do a rewrite. We don't like what you've been doing. And we're expecting that sometime in February. Their next meeting is at the end of February. Don't confuse that with the other one, right? Don't fall for, oh, here's the new treaty and forget about the amendments. Okay. But this is a time and a situation that can bring people together in love. Reach out to the people that you know and love and say, hey, I just want to raise your awareness about a situation that's actually kind of good news, right? My understanding is the gospel is supposed to be good news, right? So go spread some good news and say, look, just spread the word. Tell everybody you know, right? Don't make it, no, nobody has to be convinced of what they want to. People don't even know the details. How could they have an opinion? It's kind of funny. If someone gives you an opinion and it's different than yours, okay, ask two questions. Ask yourself and ask them, did you read the documents? Or did you form an opinion without really understanding what the heck is going on? You need to understand what the heck is going on before you form an opinion about it, at least in my world.
Oh yeah.
Okay. Okay. And so if somebody gives you blowback, just say, hey, show me which article and which paragraph you like. Show me which article and paragraph you don't like. They won't know what the heck you're talking about. And you will reveal the fact that that's the situation. So we need people to be properly informed, but we don't need to be people to be afraid. You know, maybe we need to get it on a loop. Everybody knows it. The last line of the Star Spangled Banner, we're supposed to be the land of the free and the home of the brave. So don't be afraid. Find your courage, because if we all find our courage, we'll keep our freedom.
I'm with you on that. That's what we do every day, James. I'm also I used to be a professional athlete. So sometimes I know the value of lighting a fire under somebody's ass. So there's various approaches to things. And I'm usually on a very calm side. However, I do see that sometimes a sense of urgency helps people saying, okay, I'm focusing on this right now. There is a sense of urgency, and I don't, I don't want to kind of water down your beautiful words. Heart-centered and God-centered is where this is all coming from. And that's basically leading into my last question, James. Why are you doing this? I know why we're doing it, but why are you doing it?
I'll answer that in a second, but I want to touch on what you just said. I'm working harder than I ever have. I'm all over the place. I'm up at 4 in the morning, going to bed, when I crash. This is the time to bust your butt. Okay. They're failing. That's the time you drive in and push harder. Okay. I am certainly not advocating, being lazy. Right now is the time. But what is it that you do? As hard as you possibly can, as much as you possibly can. Let me tell you, if you do what I just asked you to do with all your loved ones, you'll be lucky to hit the bottom of the list by January 27th. If you really take the time to make a human connection to the people you know and love, hey, how you doing? What do you think about that WHO stuff? Check this out. Tell me what you think. You'll be lucky to get to the bottom of your list. And, just posting something on Facebook doesn't cut it. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about, oh, I tweeted it. No, I'm talking about every single individual human being that you're, in connection with. Strengthen that connection, because over the past 4 years, those connections have been shattered. Why am I doing this? It's probably about 2 years ago. I was working in my yard and I got inspired. That word, I don't know where I got that word. I literally got an inspiration, right? And I stopped, I put down my shovel and I looked up. I said, God, I volunteer. I'm ready to take on a project. I can do more. Just tell me what you want me to do and I'll do it. So I volunteered, and there wasn't a lightning bolt that hit me. And I've done this before, and sometimes it's like, boom, oh, okay. Wow, where'd that come from? About 2 months later, I found that document that I mentioned that the Biden administration had put out. And I was reading an article and it said that this group had discovered this document. And I clicked on the hyperlink and I started reading and I went, oh, and that's when I got the lightning bolt. It's like, oh, that's an assignment that I'm suited for. And every morning when I wake up, that moment where you awaken and you're like, oh, okay, it's another day. I'll lay there and thoughts come through. And it's like, all right, what do you want me to do today? And whatever thought catches in the sense that, oh, yeah, I got to go do that. That's what gets me out of bed and going. And so I don't want to say that I'm doing God's work. That just sounds, I don't know, pretentious or something. I listen to my insides, and to the best of my knowledge, maybe the technology exists to separate you from, your inner guidance, but I don't think they figured out how to censor that small voice inside. So I listen to it, and so in terms of censorship, share this video. Don't count on the algorithms to spread it. You can spread it. And if you don't, then you're censoring this message. So, as much as you possibly can, spread the word.
Thank you, James Roguski, for your tireless work, for reaching millions of people, for reaching people in local, state, and federal government positions, because I know many have learned from you, and because of you, they have changed their position, or at least, like you said, formed an informed opinion, which is important, and are actually now on our team and helping by exposing
Mhm.
this and stopping this. So I encourage everybody, go to jamesroguski.substack.com. We put it down there. Stop the Who, exit the Who. James has got many domains, but they all kind of start leading to the same place. And here's what I want you to do: read his Substack. They're informative. They're entertaining articles, very informative in detail. And then what I would encourage you to do: contrast and compare. Go to the WHO website and see the actual documents, how James put it together, and so you'll see it's the truth. That's what I've done. I've been there hours and hours and hours studying this. So I encourage you to do it. Please share it, like James said, not from a place of fear, but from a place of love. And I think we can create enough momentum around this that this will be pushed further and further back. So they will be scared to come forward with this and say, hey, that's just not happening. James Roguski, thank you once again. Much love to you, brother.
Use
Thank you for.
use this to bring people together. It's totally possible, and now is the time.
Yes, sir. Thank you. And thank you, Inspired Tribe, for tuning in. We love you. We appreciate you. And we'll be back with you again very, very soon.